Good morning, everyone. Good to see everyone here this morning. Glad to have our visitors here as well. Before we get started this morning, if you will, please pray with me. Dear Heavenly Father, we come to you this morning. We thank you and praise you for this day we have, this time we have to study your word. Father, we ask that you would lead and guide us in this study. Help us to learn the things that we need to know from the Lord's actions and inactions here as we go through these trials that the Lord is experiencing. We ask that you would help us to learn from his example and learn from the things that are happening here, that we could put some of this into practice in our lives, and also understand that the sacrifice that he's making and the way he's purposefully doing this, Father, that he's made this choice to follow your plan and to follow it to its very end, and all doing that out of love for us, Father. Help us to learn and understand from these things and put them into practice in our lives. In Jesus' name, amen. So looking at the trials, because we're to the point now where Jesus is going before Pilate in the Praetorium. He's been condemned by the religious leaders, and now, like I said, he's going to Pilate, and then going to be a brief trip over to see Herod. But all this has to happen. Jesus has to suffer everything for us, even these trials that are, he's being condemned for, basically for following God correctly and being the Messiah, being God's servant. So he's being condemned even though he's sinless, and now even though he's broken no laws, again, he's going to be condemned by the legal authorities as well. He's going to be treated as a sinful lawbreaker in our place, right? So he's being treated as if he, somebody said this, I forget who it was, but he's being treated as if he lived my life, as if he's done the wrong things that I've done, right? That's how we should kind of look at this. Even though he's not done anything wrong. So first we'll look at Matthew and Mark. These are like short summaries of these trials here with Pilate, and actually they don't even mention Herod. And then we'll look at Luke and John, and we'll get more into the meat of his encounter here with Pilate, and also we'll see the mention of Herod, though that's a quick little thing. And I'll probably repeat some verses just to keep the accounts connected and flowing, hopefully. And like I said, Luke and John will have a little more detail. Well, actually, significant amount of detail that Matthew and Mark don't really have. Now, the timing of this is also important. Realize this is all happening between about 6 and 8 a.m. because by 9 a.m., Jesus is nailed to the cross. So this is all happening very early, just like they had planned. They did all of their stuff under the cover of night. And now in the morning, they've taken Jesus after they've religiously condemned him. They've taken him to Pilate early in the morning. And so they're going through the legal process of getting him condemned to be executed. So this is, again, early in the morning. Now, Mark is the one that tells us that Jesus is on the cross by 9 a.m. If you look at Mark chapter 15, verse 25, I'll just mention it here. We will see that as we go through these accounts, we'll see that. Maybe not this morning, though. So all this had to occur pretty quickly. They just had a few hours here in the morning to do this, but they did manage to do this. Let's see. So they have to see Pilate, see Herod, come back to Pilate. They go through the choice of Barabbas or Jesus, and then Jesus has to be scourged and more before he actually gets to the cross. So there's only just a few hours for all these things to happen. So this all happened early in the morning, just like the council had planned and wanted. They want to get Jesus on the cross before most of the public even has a chance to know what's going on. And that is basically what we're going to see. All right. They were basically successful, unfortunately. Well, it's God's plan. On the one hand, Fortunately for us, on the other hand, I can't help but just, feel like it's a bad thing, right? And maybe you have that same conflict I do, but I admit that it was God's plan and it is, good for us. And we appreciate what he went through for us. So before we dig into all this, if you think about Pilate, what's your general impression of Pilate? Matt?
He's kind of a wishy-washy politician.
Yeah, he's kind of a wishy-washy.
Faithful. I mean,
Huh?
He doesn't come off faithful so much here, but he there was a reference when he inspired a whole bunch of other people and mingled their love, their sacrifices, and all that stuff.
That's right. He did do that. He's a pretty ruthless guy in a way. Yes, Pat. Right. He's wishy-washy. He's a people pleaser. He's a politician, right? And he's worried about his position within the Roman government. Now, that's true. And in the end, that's what really kind of makes the final decision for him, is he's worried about his status with Rome. And we have to remember that people in his position, even though he's a governor, if you displease Rome enough, they will kill you. So just be aware of that. I mean, he has a reason to have some fear, but that is true. But nonetheless, there are I had read that there are some Coptic churches that they count Pilate and his wife as saints. And I believe that's like quite a bit too generous. I know, it's crazy. And just so you know, Coptic churches, okay, the Coptic churches, what I'd read about was they're founded in Egypt. They're founded in Egypt, supposedly by St. Mark, according to the things. And then they split from the regular churches. They split off from what I'll call the Orthodox churches of the time, around 451 AD. And there was a weird reason they did this. And maybe you'll see a difference here that I don't see. But the reasoning was there was a council of Chalcedon where they declared that Christ exists in two natures, fully divine and fully human. Okay. But the Coptic church rejected this and they said, no, Christ has one united nature that is both divine and human. I beg to see the difference between these two statements. I do not understand. But nonetheless, so they split off. And that's just so you know, the Catholic organization really didn't exist as we know it at that time. The forerunner of it in Rome kind of existed, but it wasn't really there. So coming back to Pilate, though, just so you know, that's kind of an odd offshoot of churches, this Coptic Orthodox church. I think we'll see that Pilate does want to free Jesus multiple times, but the way he's going about it, it seems to be purposefully insulting the Jewish leaders. And I think from what I've read about him, he just doesn't like them, and he doesn't like their religion. He seems to disdain that. And he's not really standing on any principle with them. I mean, even though he says and he realizes, or at least according to what we read about him, he seems to realize that Jesus is innocent, not really doing anything. But he's just purposefully aggravating the Jews in this. And in the end, he takes the easy way out because he's a politician, he's wishy-washy, and he's afraid. That's really what it comes down to. But I just thought I would mention that. And does anybody have anything on Pilate before we move on? Okay. All right, so we'll read our verses here. Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, saying, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus said to him, "It is as you say." And while he was being accused by the chief priests and elders, he answered nothing. Then Pilate said to him, "Do you not hear how many things they testify against you?" But he answered him not one word, so that the governor marveled greatly. Now at the feast, the governor was accustomed to releasing to the multitude one prisoner whom they wished. Now Matthew's account is a very brief summary. Mark's is very similar. He doesn't mention certain things. So we'll just take a brief look at these verses here. What surprising answer does Jesus give Pilate when he's asked here? Well, he answers this one question, right? Right. He does say, or he affirms, that he is the King of the Jews. Yes, man.
My translation, I mentioned this before, it's so different. It's like, you yourself say it. Like, you said it. It's kind of like weird. It's
what it is, because I looked a little bit into that. It has something to do with their customs at that time in their culture. It was a way of affirming something, but it was kind of what they call it, an idiom or something. It was kind of a strange thing that they did. I do not fully understand why you would reply that way, but basically he's affirming it, but it's like he's not taking responsibility in a way or something. It's kind of odd, but he is affirming it. Yeah, he's like, you said it. So, but he is affirming that he is the King of the Jews. And anybody at that time would have understood that he was basically replying yes. Okay. So that was one of the things I had read about that, because it's weird. It's always read strangely to me, and in English, it doesn't come across quite the same way, I don't think. But is Jesus saying that he wants to claim the throne? Right.
Like, he's not trying to take
Caesar's
throne from Pilate and all this.
Right. And the only throne that Pilate is concerned about is, anything that would come against Rome. So like if he was trying to claim the throne of Israel, say, that would be an issue. But he's not doing that. And we'll see, there's a great conversation we're going to see in John, because we're going to have to go through all 4 of the Gospels to really get this whole conversation. We'll see in John how clear he really gives a much clearer answer, a much better answer than just this summary here. Okay. Let's see. And then whose accusations does Jesus ignore? Man. Yep. The chief priests and elders, all the religious leaders, all their accusations, he's just ignoring them. He's totally just ignoring those accusations. And this goes with the prophecy we see in Isaiah 53, verse 7. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He was led as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shears is silent, so he opened not his mouth. And we're going to see a number of times where Jesus fulfills this prophecy by just not replying to a lot of these lies. All right. So now Jesus didn't answer their accusations. So how does Pilate react to that? And why? But he's surprised, right? He marvels at this. And then why does he marvel? I mean, if you think about it, anytime you're falsely accused of something, aren't you at the very least going to say, well, that's a lie, these are lies? But Jesus is not saying anything about that. He's not answering that. And be in the right, but not. That's my point. Thank you. Yes. The point is that it goes against our nature. If we're falsely accused of something and we're in the right and we know we're in the right, it's very hard not to make some sort of defense. But Jesus doesn't, at least not against those accusations. Now, he does answer Pilate truthfully about the King of the Jews thing. So let's see. Again, Luke and John is going to go into more detail on this. And then what's the tradition there in verse 15 that they're mentioning? Or that Matthew's mentioning? Yeah, at this feast every year, the governor would normally release one prisoner. And the idea was it was one prisoner whom the people would like to have released. And in this case, since he's dealing with the Sanhedrin and the council, I'm imagining that it's usually those people who get to choose who's released. That seems to be the implication. So let's see. If we take now, I want to come back to this point. The reason I pointed that out and came there, so I want to come back to this point in each of the Gospels, so that we cover this conversation and we come back to the point where Pilate is getting ready to release somebody. So from here, we'll go to Mark, and we'll look at this Mark's summary of this conversation as well. If we look at Mark chapter 15, verses 1 through 6, immediately in the morning, the chief priests held a consultation with the elders and scribes and the whole council, and they bound Jesus, led him away, and delivered him to Pilate. That's kind of the end of where we had read last time. And then in verse 2, we actually see him before Pilate. Then Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" He answered and said to him, "It is as you say." And the chief priests accused him of many things, but he answered nothing. Then Pilate asked him again, saying, "Do you answer nothing? See how many things they testify against you." But Jesus still answered nothing, so that Pilate marveled. Now at the feast, he was accustomed to releasing one prisoner to them whomever they requested. So again, Mark is summarizing very similar to Matthew. Here we see Jesus answer the same question about being the king of the Jews. And again, Jesus fulfills prophecy by not answering the lies he's accused of. Mark, these two accounts are very, very agreeable. Pilate again is surprised that Jesus does not defend himself. And then we come back to this point, like I said, where they're going to go to see about releasing a prisoner. So we're coming back to that. So if we go to Luke, we're going to get into some more detail about some of these conversations and things. So if we go to Luke chapter 23, verses 1 through 17. So this is going to be a little longer. Like I said, Luke and John get into some more details that are important for us to know. Then the whole multitude of them arose and led him to Pilate. Again, that's at the end of that last thing in the morning when they had reconvened and they have Jesus. And they began to accuse him, saying, "We found this fellow perverting the nation and forbidding to pay taxes to Caesar, saying that he himself is Christ, a king." Then Pilate asked him, saying, "Are you the king of the Jews?" He answered him and said, "It is as you say." So what accusations are they bringing against Jesus here? Yes, Matt?
Well, the difference is they actually show the specific accusations, right?
Yes.
But that you're misleading the nation and dishonoring Caesar, don't pay taxes, taking himself in places.
Right. All these things, and I did this little thing here. Perverting the nation basically just means that he's misleading or lying to the nation, right? That's how that's supposed to be read. Forbidding to pay taxes, tribute to Caesar, and setting himself up as Christ the King, right? This is the idea. So if we look at the first one, perverting the nation, basically just saying that Jesus is lying to all of them. The implication is that he's lying to them to incite them, to get them to come together for a revolt or a rebellion. Number two, forbidding to pay taxes. This is illegal. Again, looking at this as an illegal move as a part of a revolt or a rebellion against Rome. And three, this one most of all, and this is the one that you'll see Pilate is the most concerned with, the idea, again, that as part of a revolt, he wants to set himself up as king. And of course, this would be in direct opposition of Roman rule. So all three of these really lead to this same point of Jesus is leading a revolt, a rebellion. That's what they're trying to present, because Rome does not care how blasphemous Jesus is, which is what they care about, right? They claim he's blasphemous. So I'm not saying he's blasphemous. Let me make that clear. I'm just saying the religious leaders, they condemned him saying he was being blasphemous, right? But Rome doesn't care about that. And Pilate especially does not care about that. Like I said, from what I read about him, he does not care about their religion. But this is something that Pilate has to pay attention to. Here we have a possible revolt, rebellion. That's another issue. That's a political issue and security issue. Now, the Jews today still believe this idea. I've heard some of them say it, that Jesus was trying to lead a revolt against Rome and got himself killed. So some of them still believe that version of this account. So, of these accusations here. So based on these accusations, what does Pilate ask? Matt. Yeah, are you the king of the Jews, right? I mean, this really kind of makes more sense now. Why is he coming saying that? Because they've given him these political accusations, yes.
So they technically Herod, or maybe the previous Herod had been king of the Jews.
Yeah, there had been. Wasn't Herod the Great considered? Yeah,
I think the current Herod at this time, his role diminished.
Yeah.
One of the
Yeah, I think it's Antipas, and his role is diminished. But yeah, Herod the Great, his dad had been, or I think it was his dad. Anyway, one of the previous Herods had been the king of the Jews. All right, so he's asking this. Now, do you understand why he's asking this? Because of the rebellion idea, the revolt idea. He's gotten, see, as the governor, they don't have like a jury system or something like that. As the governor, he's got to investigate. He's got to find out, is this a real threat or not? And he's got to judge it. He's got to do the whole thing. Judge, jury, executioner. He's got to do that. And he's got to do that for Rome, right? If Jesus is a threat to the peace, then is he starting a rebellion? That's what Pilate needs to know. Is this a real threat, right? Now, how does Jesus answer when he asks him this question? Basically, he says yes, right? I mean, we kind of went over that. So basically, he says yes. Should this not be alarming to Pilate?
Well, yeah. I think maybe because he didn't go on and like, yes, I am king and I'm going to take over Rome. And yeah. He just kind of said, coming off as maybe a philosopher or something.
Right. And when we get to John, you'll see more the reasoning why Pilate isn't so alarmed, because Jesus does give a longer answer than this. But it should be somewhat surprising or alarming to Pilate. It could be bad for his career. But worse, like I said, I mean, he could even be killed if he doesn't do a good job. Yes?
I was thinking, answer that way, not an hard answer, it's one to turn against the person. So you didn't give the definite answer. And you also kind of throw the question back at Pilate. Make him.
Right.
What you say. Maybe make him kind of search his own soul and come accusation to Jesus to show the wisdom of Jesus.
Right. He does push that back sort of towards Pilate, right? With the way he responds, that it's as you say, right? So he does push that back a little bit towards Pilate in saying that, they're accusing him of this, and that's as you say. But at the same time, with that, like I said, with that, the way that is worded and all, the way they looked at that was a positive affirmation, though. But
I think it has many reasons. Shows the wisdom of Jesus.
Yeah.
They got many ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not so much that he's incriminating himself. And when we go to John, we'll see a little bit more of this conversation, and it will make more sense, actually. That it's not a threat or a danger, even though he is saying he is the king and a king. But like I said, we'll see that in John more so than here. Oh, wait, actually, hold on. Let's look at that real quick. I got those verses right here. Duh, I forgot. So this is the way it goes sometimes. Anyway, John chapter 18, verses 36 through 38, because we need to see this here so that we understand. So Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight so that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from here." Pilate therefore said to him, "Are you a king then?" Jesus answered, You say rightly that I am a king. For this cause I was born, and for this cause I have come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. Pilate said to him, "What is the truth?" And when he had said this, and I should probably read that a little differently, like, what is truth? Like kind of Pilate is not very impressed with the idea of truth, right? It's like, well, what is truth? He's kind of that. And when he had said this, he went out again to the Jews and said to them, I find no fault in him at all. So we'll look at this again when we go through John, but we really did need to see this here because that makes more sense. That helps this whole conversation make more sense when we understand this. Yes.
And this emphasis on truth is probably very bad. Recognizes he's not trying to overthrow Caesar. It's more of a philosophical idea. That's what he takes it.
Yes.
What is truth?
Pilate, yeah.
Blah, blah, blah.
He's looking at it as a religious, philosophical thing. He's like, what is truth? You know, he does not like their religion anyway. So that's his response, you know, like, ah. So, but since we're here, what does Jesus tell Pilate about his kingdom? It's not of this world, right? He says, yeah, I'm a king, but my kingdom is not of this world. What does he say about his servants? They're basically, now this is not what he says, but he is basically saying this. He's saying they are not going to fight. They are not fighting. My servants would fight if his kingdom were of this world, but they are not. They're not going to be fighting. So in other words, he's not causing any war. He's not going to create any rebellion, any revolt, right? He's no threat to Rome or the peace of the region. Now, what does Jesus tell Pilate his mission is? To bear witness to the truth, right? To bear witness to the truth. And what's the truth that he's referring to? God's word, the gospel, God's message of salvation, right? That's the truth that Jesus is referring to. And, yeah, man.
Part of the answer does take his mission is king, but again, it's world.
Right.
For this, I think
right. Yeah, for this cause I was born, and for this cause I've come into the world that I should. Yeah. So he is a king bearing witness to the truth, but it's just not. He's not trying to start any war or revolt or rebellion. And then how does Pilate react? He scoffs. You know, what is truth? Blah. You know, it doesn't really sound mean. He just sounds a little maybe frustrated or disparaging, but not really necessarily, you know, mean. So if we come back to Luke and look at the next verses, we'll be back in sync here with that. You kind of need that though as part of this conversation. So Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowd, I find no fault in this man. But they were the more fierce, saying, he stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, beginning from Galilee to this place. When Pilate heard of Galilee, he asked if the man were a Galilean. So if we look at verse 4, who are the crowd that's mentioned here? Yeah, the crowd, like it says here, it says the chief priests and the crowd. That's just the rest of the council. The council was actually quite a big number of people. It wasn't just like 5 or 10 people. It was a pretty big number. Anyway, so he's talking to the chief priests and the crowd, the other elders and all of that were with them. So it's the rest of the Sanhedrin. You know, the chief priests are the ones that really seem to be dealing directly with Pilate. But remember, all the council came. If we look back, like if you looked back in verse 1, it says all of them came and brought Jesus here. And you'll see the same thing if you look at Mark chapter 15, verse 1, and Matthew chapter 27, verse 2. You'll see that the whole council came with them, bringing Jesus. Now, John is a little different. He neither confirms nor denies this in his account, but he does use the word they, so it does imply that there's a number of people that came at least. But so anyway, that implies agreement. So this crowd, it's something to remember. This crowd is not the general citizens of Jerusalem. This crowd is the council and maybe any buddies or friends they had that they might have brought along. This crowd is not just the general people of the city. Yes, ma'am?
I have a note that indicates it's about 70 or 71 people.
Oh.
It's a big group.
Yeah. It's a good sized group, and yeah, it's a good number of people. I couldn't find that kind of number so good, but Matt says maybe about 70 people thereabouts. So that would make some sense. All right, so that's who this crowd is. That's who's there. So what does Pilate tell the Jewish leaders when he comes out? I find no fault with him, right? I find nothing wrong with Jesus. Jesus is not trying to do anything. Basically, I mean, in a way, you could say he's telling them they're lying. I mean, but he doesn't come out and say that from what we see. So how do they react?
Double down.
Yeah,
Causing trouble.
Yeah, they double down. They get, it says, my translation says they get fierce. The Greek here, the Greek word says they were stoutly insisting, which they were, they were strongly insisting, right? So think of it as intensely or maybe even passionately, but they were very insistent. So what do they say Jesus is doing then?
Making trouble.
Yeah, stirring up the people, making trouble. And the stirring up, that Greek word means to incite, to incite people. Again, the idea to incite a rebellion or a revolt. So they know they need to get this kind of verdict. They need to get Jesus convicted of that type of thing so that Rome, Pilate, will act and crucify Jesus, will kill him. So what mistake do they make, though, here? I think it's a mistake. They mention Galilee, right? They mention that Jesus started in Galilee, and then Pilate's like, wait, what? Is he a Galilean, right? So now, why does Pilate care about that? Jurisdiction, yep, he can pass. There's several things. If he can throw this, basically he can say that, well, this is out of my territory and someone else will have to look at this and take care of this, is the idea, right? So he can pass the buck, he can pass that responsibility to someone else. So if we look at these next verses, and as soon as he knew that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at that time. Now, when Herod saw Jesus, he was exceedingly glad, for he had desired for a long time to see him, because he had heard many things about him, and he hoped to see some miracle done by him. Do you remember the earlier mention of Herod wanting to see Jesus and what he thought Jesus, or who he thought Jesus might be?
John the Baptist.
He thought he might be John the Baptist come back, because he was worried, because he's the one that had John the Baptist beheaded. So that was part of it. Now, they don't mention that again here, and this has been some time later. But I just wanted us to remember that. So now he knows Jesus is from Galilee. What does Pilate do? He passes the buck. He sends him to Herod and says, here, take care of your problem, right? So why was Herod in town? The Passover feast and all that. The Herods, now mainly for political reasons, but the Herods would at least superficially tend to follow the Jewish customs just to political reasons, like I said, to keep the Jews on their side. I think they would even claim to be Jews, but anyway, like I said, it's a very superficial thing. Yes?
Their heritage was Edom, Esau, so they were kind of
right.
Back to Abraham, but they weren't really Jewish.
Right, they really weren't Jewish. That's right. Now I remember that now. But yeah, so their heritage wasn't really Jewish, but they would kind of claim this, and they would superficially follow things, like I said, for political reasons. So, okay, so we talked about this, about why sending Jesus to Herod. So how does Herod react to that? He's happy, right? And remember, Herod thought that Jesus might be John the Baptist. And here he wants to see a miracle. He wants to see a sign, right? That's what Herod wants. Then,
Wants to be entertained.
Yeah, he kind of wants to be entertained. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, maybe he does. Anyway, he wants to see a sign and a miracle. We're technically out of time. Does anybody have anything else? Yes, Pat?
The scripture says that told the people, the apostles, do not cast your pearls into the swine, and anything else that you do not offer anything.
Yeah, now, yeah, he does say, do not cast your pearls before swine. And so, I mean, Jesus is not going to perform. He's not a magician. He's not going to take the power that God has given him or that he has through being God and just perform. He's not going to perform like a magician or something, right? That's an abuse of that power. And I can't remember the exact wording for that, but anyway, that would be wrong, and Jesus is not going to do that. He's had opportunities to do that. Satan tempted him to jump off the temple so that an angel would keep him from, being injured, and again, tempting him to put on a show. And Jesus wasn't going to do that. So, and he's not going to do it for Herod either, obviously. But we'll pick up from here next week. I do thank you for your time and your attention this morning.